across the board, I think it's pretty important to realize, again, how much competition we actually have with the organic users. It's very difficult for us to compete with some of this content that people are making. Like Mr. Beast is a good example. That guy came in and basically just started like doing weird stuff. I sawed a table in half with a toothpick. I buried myself alive. I locked a guy in a grocery store for 5 weeks. Like there's content being made. It's much more interesting than your email about your 10% offer. I'm sorry.
Way more.
I'm sorry, it just is. So the best thing that you can do is don't think about advertising, emails, landing pages, any of your ecosystem as a sales tool. Think of it as a content tool. Your job now is to entertain or be relatable. That's basically it. You can inject information and offers and all kinds of value props and things in there if you want, but you only got two jobs: entertain or relate to people, and that's it.
Welcome back. This might be part 2. This might be the same episode. I'm not sure how we're going to cut this up yet, but welcome back. Episode 4.5 or episode 5 of Triple Whale's 10 Tactics to Master Before Q4. We just got a hell of a lesson from Sarah on emotional and psychological marketing. It's something that I had my eyes open to a couple of years ago, and that has produced an insane amount of growth and profit for the business I work for. And I know that she's had similar success stories with a bunch of her brands. So Sarah, thanks so much for coming back and joining us again.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Appreciate it. I'm excited.
Last episode was all about how to understand your true value props and how to create messaging that kind of speaks to the core emotions people are buying for. Right now, I want to talk about how to pair that with visuals. That's where people spend the majority of their time creative testing. I'm glad we spent 45 minutes on the messaging because I think that's way more important.
Yep.
And the visuals are honestly where I'm a little more shoot from the hip with it, and like, let's try just striking visual things and see what happens. But I know there's a lot of psychology and neuroscience that goes into that that you are very well versed in. So let's stay on the topic of gifting, since that's what we're talking about, getting ready for Q4. Give me your thoughts on how to create visuals that are going to get people to give great gifts.
This is going to be a hard one. Nobody come after me. It is incredibly difficult to know which part of the image got someone to buy. Incredibly difficult. Unless you're going to go back to what we did in 2016, when we were basically incremental testing on Facebook, where we would change one image, but every headline would be the same. That's basically the only way to know whether or not an image is doing the front load of the work. Now, most of the time when I do image work with people, I try and help them kind of understand there's easier ways for the brain to process the image down, which is what we want to prioritize. So most of the time, the brain will process the image first. It gets processed about 60,000 times faster than the text does.
Whoa.
So I always tell people the image gets people to stop, the text gets people to stay. So your message is incredibly important as long as the image got them to stop. So I have a hard time prioritizing video for this reason, because there's no way to know what in that video got somebody to purchase. It could literally be like this plant in the background. Like, we just don't know what the brain associated with dopamine, and if there was enough motivation to get someone to click and buy. So this is the reason why I prioritize statics usually over everything else until I know which message is hitting correctly. And then I can go through and start testing a bunch of different like images to get people to purchase. So
I'm with you. Static images for the win. We have not gotten to the episode yet where I talk about Facebook ad strategy, but when we get there, static images are
statics
for us like 95% of the new creatives we launch. They're really cheap and easy to produce. It's easier to test things quickly, and CPMs are cheaper, so it's a win-win-win over there. You've exposed me to some ideas of how we can position our products in what we put around them and what we don't put around them to make them really stand out. And for those of you listening, I sell watches, which are a very visual thing. There's something that people want to look good and look striking and be noticeable. So what are some of the things that we've done together that have really helped kind of our product stand out in the sea of infinite scrolling on Facebook?
Originally, I think, when we first started working together, all of your ads were very, very masculine. So a lot of the imagery in them were focused on the individual buyer instead of the gifting buyer, which we just talked a little bit about. So I had prepped an ad for you that had like a white marble background on it. And
Yeah.
I remember your face when I showed it to you. You were like,
Uh,
what the hell
I
is
was like,
this?
"We really just paid her for this?"
Yeah. Luckily, my messaging worked.
Crushed.
But the interesting thing is, I remember you tested the more feminine backgrounds and they did not work. So this is
Uh,
the
the first batch did not.
yeah, first batch did not work.
But then this was later. We hired you again because it ended up working. But this was headed into the new year this year, where you kind of told us for our Valentine's Day shoot to
Yes.
go more like
Yeah.
soft and luxurious and felt and
Mhm.
silk in our ads, or
Yeah.
in the backgrounds of our photo shoots when usually we'd gone with wood
Yep.
and rugged looking
Yep.
materials.
Masculine. Yep.
Those ones crushed.
Yes.
So
And this
marble
is
background, maybe not, but the silk
yep.
sheets that we got and
Soft stuff.
the bright red background, we'll put up some examples here. Um, that stuff crushed, and I think
Yeah.
speaks a lot more to the people that are buying it for Valentine's Day, which are not the rugged and tough guys, but
Yep.
they're more gentle counterparts.
Yeah, it's the women that are buying for their, like, rough and rowdy men, and this is the interesting part, and that's the reason why I pushed you guys into this marble idea at the beginning, 'cause I the one thing that I noticed most from brands is they get stuck. They get really
Yep,
stuck on a visual that they just like, this is it. This is what we are. This is what we do, and then they never try anything else because they're trying really hard to just stay with a specific vibe, right?
yep,
I think once you get hooked on ambiance, very hard to get off of it unless somebody else comes in and says, "Have you tried this?"
yeah,
So, marble didn't work, and that's the reason why I pointed that out because for most women, marble is a very, I don't know, classy, high end, right? You only put marble excuse me, goodness, you only put marble in places where, like, you want people to gather around, like kitchen countertops. So the reason I went for marble is mostly, all right, let's test and see whether or not we can get a specific type of customer in just from using more feminine backgrounds. So the nice part is I love that marble didn't work because it pushed you guys to try something
yeah,
else that was also feminine. So silk, velvet, right? Or like something very soft for Valentine's Day in particular works incredibly well for a female audience, mostly because that's what they're focused on, anyways, which is like this luxurious, kind of like seductive Valentine's vibe. So, yes, imagery is weird because it affects the brain in a very strange way. Again, the brain has odd associations with things that you wouldn't think it has an association with, like fluffy chicks almost always bring up Easter, right?
mm,
Or farm. So, depending on what you have inside your imagery, you can drastically change the person that you bring in just based upon texture.
yeah. I remember when you first kind of called out their ads were masculine. I was like, "Well, duh, we sell men's watches, idiot." But
I love this. It's amazing.
like, even at that time, I knew a ton of our customers were women.
Yep.
I thought they wanted to see rough and masculine surfaces because it reminded them of their guy. Turns out,
Yeah.
I'm the big dumb guy that's like, "I know what women want. This is what they want." But it helped a ton getting
This
that
is what
outside
they want.
perspective and then going through, like, a few rounds of iteration
Yeah.
until we uncovered some stuff that crushed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and testing is really important here. I know if anybody has heard Sarah say, I don't like volume, I am fine with volume as long as you test the messaging and the actual
Yeah.
visual aspect of it first.
Yeah.
You can't go for volume if you don't know what you're testing. So
Yeah,
the
I think, like,
iterations worked well.
strategic
Yes,
volume, thoughtful volume
strategic volume is
is
very,
what
very
you
important.
should be testing for sure, and I
Yeah.
think for us, like, as we've experienced with different materials and backgrounds and lighting treatments, our creative diversity right now is, I think, the best it's ever been,
Yes. You
and
guys are
all these
doing really well,
th
crushing it.
thank you. Our guy, JB, in-house photographer, is killing it, and then Chris and myself handle a lot of the inspiration and direction for it, and
Yeah.
it's been awesome to be
Yeah.
able to have a resource in house that can do this at
Totally.
the level we are. But all these different kind of scenes and backgrounds and materials we're testing, they're not by accident.
Yeah.
They're like they're
Exactly.
not just random stuff that we're like, oh, like that would be cool. we are very intentionally and thoughtfully and methodically going to be like, hey, we did this kind of like Americana shoot at a farm with a guy in jeans and a flannel on his tractor and the white picket fence. And we were
Yeah.
like, cool, let's see if this appeals to middle America.
Yep.
And we recently did a shoot where, as opposed to our usual dark and moody stuff, everything was on a bright white,
Yeah.
reflective, mirrory background.
How did that
Um,
perform? I was gonna ask
s-
you how that did.
some of them are doing really well right now.
Oh, I'm so excited. Yep.
So I think
Interesting.
when you understand who you're selling to, the messaging that can convert them,
Yeah.
the visual testing can become a ton of fun as long as you stay within the guardrails of, testing rooted in data.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it has to be rooted in that data, and it's interesting because I want people to prioritize behavioral data,
Yeah.
right, over, like, metric data or, like, vanity data is what I would call, right? Engagement is great. Doesn't tell me a whole lot about, like, what this type of person behaves like
Yeah.
in the real world. So, you gotta know exactly which metrics we're trying to track. Obviously, that comes down to, like, good media buying practices. But for the most part, I love that you guys are not afraid to test different vibes for a product that really only has one
Right.
because it is made of wood. It's got a lot of like really interesting industrial metal pieces on it. It's also going after one specific type of person. But this is the funny part that I have to gently remind brands every single quarter. Consumer behavior changes about every 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And depending on who you are marketing to, you're going to have to change how you look and what you say, not necessarily the core message, because obviously, like, show your man he's worth every second is still a core message for
Yep.
you guys. But how it's presented is going to have to change depending on what time of year it is.
Yep. Well,
Very
and
important.
like, especially for any brand that's growing out there,
Yeah.
you don't know what it's going to take to hit the next new person that comes into your
Yeah.
brand. Like, I think about
Yep.
us even this year, like, yeah, we've grown, revenue a ton, which is great. And like, obviously that means we're spending more on ads. We've grown
Yeah.
impressions and awareness a ton. But like, we also launched a collection with Jack Daniels.
Yeah.
That brought in someone new that
Yep.
didn't know about us a year ago. We also did a
Totally.
collection with bamboo and ebony wood from Jamaica, licensed with Bob Marley. That brought in a different
Such a
person
cool
than
watch.
the Jack
Oh,
collection, and
yep.
like, so I think if you're a brand that's growing and kind of launching new products and categories, this is even more important because
Yeah.
what got you here might not necessarily get you to your next
Yep.
goal. So it's really important to
100%.
continue this testing process.
Yep. You gotta make sure that whatever your goal is, don't get married to it.
Yeah.
Because like, it's fine to have a really good goal, and it's fine to have, like, a good basis for what we think the brand is, but until you get to a specific level, I don't know that I
100
don't know
million
that
a year, just so just so everyone knows.
until you get to 100 million a year,
Yeah.
I don't know that it benefits you to get tied to a specific look or a specific customer type.
Yeah.
Testing and going about this, strategically is important. Unless you're just like really into it, like the guys at Liquid Death, like Mike Cicero knew what kind of brand he wanted to build.
Yeah.
And that was Liquid freaking Death. That's what he wanted. And it worked incredibly well because he already knew which emotion he was trying to solve and which one he wanted to sell.
Yeah.
For most brands, we start out functional and we grow into emotional.
Well, and I would argue that that really, I'm not gonna say only works for them, but I think they can get away with it
Yeah.
because the product itself is so universal,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yep. Large customer base.
nothing,
It's
it's
water.
water, right? Yeah, like, nothing about
It's water.
my aesthetic or fashion or vibe
Yeah.
resonates with the Liquid Death brand, but
Yeah.
I'm a customer because I think like tap water is poison and they're all trying to kill us. So like, I get that, right? Like,
Oh my god, that's amazing.
I
Yeah,
don't fit in with the brand, but the product's accessible to
yeah,
everyone, and I think
yeah,
the opposite is important for brands like ours where, it's not just one type of guy that's buying
yeah,
from us, it could be a bunch
exactly.
of different types of guys and girls, um, and I don't think any brand 100 million and under should pigeonhole themselves into, like,
No.
one thing,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah,
'cause
universal brands are gonna have a little bit easier time.
yeah. Well, and I mean, look at like the Timberland example is one I
Yeah.
always bring up. That's like Brooklyn hipster rappers and like
Yeah,
blue collar guys in South Carolina
yeah,
going to work.
Same thing. Yep.
You're not
Oh,
gonna
this is so
sell each
pissed.
of those guys a pair of boots with the
No.
same ad, with the same creative messaging.
Yeah.
That's gonna take different, creatives.
Yeah. Oh, well, it all comes and this is the reason why I love studying consumer behavior. It comes down to culturally what's happening there. Like,
Yeah.
why is it that like LA rappers and the guy who lives in like Michigan, right, will buy the same boot? There's some underlying emotion that solves it for both of them, that just, like, does it for both of them. What that emotion is would be interesting to find. Like, we're just and this is why I can't get enough of it. Because the closer you can get to the emotions that your customers are currently trying to solve, the better everything's gonna work. I say this every single time, but all comes down to how well can you convey that message.
Sarah, as we wrap up this segment on visuals, what are we missing? What's something that you wish I asked you during the last hour? Anything that you think brands need to know about how to understand their true value props and create visual and written content to get people to buy
Yeah.
this fourth quarter?
If there's anything that you're gonna benefit most from this year, outside of just like understanding consumers, I would say understanding platform psychology is probably the second most important thing that
Ooh,
nobody is talking about, including myself. I should probably talk about it more because I study it a lot, but platforms, man. Every single ad you run goes into an ecosystem that's full of organic users generating content that competes with your ads. So it's beneficial for you to know what the brain does on social media. That's like massively important.
do you look at that? I said we're wrapping up, but I'm going to talk to you for 10 more minutes about that because I think that's
Ready?
really interesting. Let's first stay on social, and then I want to
Yeah.
talk about content in email and websites and everywhere else it can live.
Yeah.
This Q4, we have a election
Yeah.
that half the country is going to be pissed about.
Yeah.
Uh, we know, and this is one of those things like we know bad things are going to happen. We might as well talk about them. Civil
Yep.
unrest, riots.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it doesn't get any worse than that. But like we know, there's going to be some ugly times,
Yeah.
um,
The
and that
hard time to
content
be an
gets
American.
amplified on social media above and below
Mhm.
all the ads we're going to be running this
Yeah.
Q4. Is there
Yeah.
anything in particular we should be aware of marketing into that ecosystem?
I think you have to oh gosh, there's so many.
All
Just
right, we'll
choose
go for
one.
another
Just
hour.
one thing. um, During times of political unrest, there's a couple things that happen in the culture or in the subgroup of humans that it is interesting to keep track of, especially for a brand that runs off of the economy that those people live in, right? So it's important to know you have competitors. It's important to know which industry you're in because you have to keep track of what you're going up against. But you also have to understand that we're living in one of the most highly communicative time periods in human history. So, what used to be a very difficult thing to obtain information. You used to have to like wait for a letter that would come over freaking a wire that was strung between cities where there was some guy just like
Crazy.
booping on the little thing. You know what I'm saying? Like
He was doing
freaking
what?
Morse
Sorry?
code. He was booping,
There you go.
booping on the Morse code. What used to be that turned into all I have to do is turn on a TV screen. And
Yeah.
now some guy behind a desk is telling me everything that's happening across an ocean, even, right? That morphed into now I have access to any sort of information on any topic at any time, at any point of the day, forever, in perpetuity, most of which is either hearsay, meaning somebody heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody, or it's sort of correct, but has a bias behind it
Yeah.
based upon whoever wrote it, right? So now we're coming up into this point where the majority of the content that we're consuming on the internet is so saturated by human inaccuracy, human emotion, and human bias that it's very difficult for us to know or trust what we see. So that's the basis of what I'm trying to get down to is consumers don't trust anything anymore. So based upon that horrible fact and like very doom and gloom that Sarah just went into, what's a brand supposed to do? How are we supposed to get consumers to purchase from us? How are we supposed to grow as a brand if the consumers don't trust what we say? The best thing that you could possibly do is understand that consistency is the only way that you're going to get trust in this
Mhm.
industry. You got to stay consistent. If you want to become a part of the political conversation, fine, but do not deviate from what your stance is, right? I just recently saw this from, do you know what Sticker Mule is?
Yep.
Sticker Mule ran an email that
Yeah.
was highly politically charged recently
Yep.
that got a lot of marketers very upset.
Yep.
I personally don't see a whole lot wrong with what they did, right?
Yep.
I'm not gonna remark on their political stance because
Right.
again,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
But
just like
like, you
a
don't think
person
taking
who's
a
remarking
stand
on this.
like that is always wrong?
Exactly. I
Right.
don't necessarily think it's always wrong because some of the best brands in the industry have taken big swings, big
Yep.
stances. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the nice part about the platforms is you can. Brands have a voice. And if you want to say something, you can. Just know that depending on which consumer you're talking to, you're either going to get a very good reaction or a very poor one. So, again, there's so much that's involved with platforms, communication, and the human ability to process this much content. It's just, man, we're living in such a weird time period of life. It's a difficult time to be a brand and try and figure out where you stand,
Yeah.
where you sit with
Well,
it.
and like I
Crazy.
think this is where I'm going to circle back all the way to the start of this episode. I think nailing those key emotions in your messaging is one of the only
Yeah.
ways to break through.
Yeah.
Because if your
100%.
news feed is like, "Hey, the country's over, civil war, the election was stolen," all the stuff
Ugh,
it's going to say on November 7th this year, and then my ad is like, "This watch is inlaid with whiskey barrel woods." You're going to be like, "Get the hell out of here. I don't
yeah.
care." But
100%.
those people are, sitting next to their spouse on the
Yeah,
couch. They might want an extra sense of connection and an extra sense
yeah,
of nurturing them and loving them and
yeah,
being close to them because that's all they have right now.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
I think that's where like nailing the messaging, not the features, not the
yeah,
value props you think you might have,
yeah,
can kind of cut through a lot of that n-
yeah,
noise
100%.
too.
Well, and
All right.
I think sorry, last point on this.
Yeah.
I think it'd be very interesting to watch and see where this goes because 'cause we're just hitting the AI, movement as well, which we could
Yeah.
talk extensively about.
Yeah.
But you're also coming up against Gen Z who has literally been born and steeped in technology. So, yeah, as a brand, just to end on a high note, you guys are very integral to what's gonna happen next. Our entire economy is based on small and large and medium scale businesses who are run by good humans who just want to make the world a better place. And the only way that we can do that is by helping people feel better about the world that they currently live in. So
Hell yeah.
you're crushing it, brands.
All
Crushing
right,
it.
last thing I promise this time. You mentioned kind of like platform specific creative and like making sure
Yeah.
that we're creating
Yep.
content in a way that's going to make sense in the context that it's shown in.
Yep.
For most of the people listening, our main channels are going to be Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, maybe a little bit of Twitter, maybe a little bit of Pinterest for kind of paid social. But
Yeah.
then there's content in our email flows and campaigns, and there's
Hmm.
content on our website.
Hmm.
Talk about the kind of different stages of, customer consideration, where they might be at the
Yeah.
funnel. I know your thoughts on the word funnel. We won't
I
get
don't
into
believe in the
that because it's not as clean as the diagrams show. But
funnel.
from your advertising
Yeah.
channels to your own channels to your website, how's your brand to be kind of
Yeah.
structuring content to make sense creatively at each stage?
Yeah. I truly believe that content is now going to have to be basically evergreen all year round. And we talked a little bit about this on like a different podcast, but there's different phases that your customer is going to go through while they're kind of like introduced to the brand, evaluating the brand, understanding their options, right? And then actually going out into the actual purchasing behavior. Across the board, I think it's pretty important to realize again how much competition we actually have with the organic users. It's very difficult for us to compete with some of this content that people are making. Like Mr. Beast is a good example. That guy came in and basically just started like doing weird stuff. I sawed a table in half with a toothpick.
Yeah.
Took him, I don't even know, like weeks, right? People watch it though. Like it's the weirdest content I think you could ever make. I buried myself alive. I locked a guy in a grocery store for 5 weeks. Like there's content being made that is much more interesting than your email about your 10% offer. I'm sorry.
Way more.
I'm sorry, it just is. So the best thing that you can do is don't think about advertising, emails, landing pages, any of your ecosystem as a sales tool. Think of it as a content tool. Your job now is to entertain or be relatable. That's basically it. You can inject information and offers and all kinds of value props and things in there if you want, but you only got two jobs: entertain or relate to people, and that's it.
Love that. Yeah, I'm gonna share a couple examples of emails that we sent during our past Father's Day and Christmas sales that I think hit those on the head. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you've caught up on the last episode of my podcast or not.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Um, but I sent I emailed like 300,000 customers a screenshot of a text from my dad.
Yes, I saw
Uh,
that and I was like, "Oh, this is great.
where he said
Great content."
he was like, "Hey, Father's Day is coming up. Please get me something better than last year." Like, just relatable. Everyone has
Nailed it,
gotten a
dad.
text from like their, I don't think my dad's
Oh my
technically a
gosh.
boomer, but older dad,
Yep,
when it's like, all right, like, dude, we get it. Like,
yep,
come on.
yep.
And
Okay, but
then
it's relatable, isn't it? And
yeah,
it's
so
funny. You
relatable.
can
And like
hit
what
both
brands are
at the
doing
same
that?
time.
Like,
Nobody.
that's
Yeah.
I think we've developed kind of my character to our email audience is like Nate the marketing guy. Um and I've gotten to
Smart.
meet some customers at events we've done, and they're like, "You're Nate? Like, you're real?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm real."
I'm a
And
real dude.
yeah, and I was
That's
drinking
amazing.
whiskey that night too. So they're like, "This is so on brand for you." I'm like, "I know." Um,
Like meeting your childhood hero.
yeah, but no, but
That's amazing.
like these people did feel like they were starting to get emails from someone they knew,
Yeah.
not all pretty graphic design, just like plain
100%.
text emails that are just like, "Hey, I did the text for my dad thing." We also did one where I got my bar tab one night on my boss's car, and it was way more money than I thought it was gonna be. And
Stressful and
I
funny.
feel like that's such a relatable pain point of like going out and being
Relatable.
like,
Yes.
"Wait, wait, we spent
Yep.
$300 at the bar last night? Like, what are we
Whoops.
doing?" Um, and yeah, love the thought of like entertain an email, especially because like, what are we gonna
Yes.
do? Email someone 45 days in a row that we
Yes.
have a sale? They know we have a sale by the
Yeah.
fourth time we email them.
Yes.
Like, you
Oh.
gotta find more creative ways of
Yeah.
reaching them.
Yeah. Well, and that is the basis and the core of any sort of email landing page ad I've ever generated that I'm like proud of. They're always the ones that are the most relatable, the
Yeah,
most interesting, the most bizarre, the ones that are just like, what the hell is this ad? And the brands that do the best are the ones that understand how to make relatable content. You're not making ads, you're making content. You're not producing emails, you're making content. Content has to be interesting because you're competing with billions of other
yeah,
emails and ads and just any posts in general. So
yeah.
yes,
That's awesome.
smart, smart.
I'll leave you with this quote that I think I heard from a Netflix executive, but I might be making it up. He said at one point, that, like, he competed more with Fortnite than, like, other streaming services,
Yes.
and I think,
Oh,
like, that level of thinking should be applied to what we're talking about here. Because like,
yeah,
hey, like, you're not just competing against
yeah,
certainly not another watch company or just another D2C advertiser. You're competing with TikToks that are way more engaging than your ads,
yeah,
or you're
yeah,
competing with, binge watching The Office on Peacock.
totally. Oh
Like,
my,
there's so much better ways
yep,
or better forms of content to fill our brains with
yeah,
than ads.
yep.
So we really got to make sure ours are
Mhm.
doing exactly what we want them to
God, smart. Pro tip: find a Nate. Just find a Nate.
do. Well, speaking of, where can they find a Sarah?
Ah, everywhere. I'm all over the place at this point, which took me years to get to, but you can follow me basically everywhere at Sarah Levinger, SarahLevinger, everywhere except for Instagram, which we've talked about before. Over there, I'm it's at Sarah.Levinger. I do have a YouTube channel that I'm trying to also spin up eventually here so I can get some more content going out there. But otherwise, go check out my website, sarahlevinger.co. I have all of my previous newsletters kind of back over there. Lots and lots of cool, like psychology focused stuff, especially on the big brands and how they're using psychology to basically do better than all the rest of us. So, woo, go
Cool,
follow
cool.
me.
Twitter, LinkedIn,
Yeah.
podcast.
Yes, I have a brand new podcast. I don't know. Can I say it's new? It's like, I don't know, 6 weeks old now, something like
That's
that.
new. Yeah, that's new.
New-ish. Me
Yeah,
and Nate sit here and we talk all about the things that nobody wants to talk about in D2C. So yes, go over, follow. You can look for Brain Driven Brands everywhere you get your podcasts.
love that. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate
Thank
it. And
you.
everyone, we will see you on the next episode of Triple Whale's 10 Tactics to Master Before Q4.